Welcome back to 28storms.com. This is your tropical weather update for Monday, September 19th. Based on the afternoon outlook from the National Hurricane Center, a tropical disturbance in the Central Atlantic, also being considered 98L Invest, now has a 60% chance of becoming the next system of the 2011 season. And also another disturbance we've been talking quite a lot about is this little area near the Gulf of Tehuantepec in the eastern Pacific. This is now being given a 40% chance of development by the Hurricane Center. On the latest low-level vorticity map from the SIMS website, you can see both of these systems getting their acts together quite clearly here. This is the one in the eastern Pacific, and this is 98L Invest. Its vorticity max has become much better defined compared to just 24 hours ago. Starting off with the Atlantic Basin, we see that many of the open waters near home, including the Western Atlantic, Caribbean, and Gulf, are all fairly quiet. We do have some convection to the south of Puerto Rico, but that's mainly due to an upper level low in the vicinity, and here it is swirling about, and we have a mid to upper level trough axis dangling across much of the central Caribbean, so nothing in that area is tropical in nature at this moment. But here we are with 98L Invest. It's still rather disorganized, and we don't have any clear-cut low-level surface circulation just yet, but this whole entire area is still just a broad low, and it's going to take more than likely a couple more days for it to fully get its act together. But there are a lot of indications that this could strengthen into a tropical depression and possibly even a tropical storm as it continues in a west to west-northwest direction. The latest shear map is indicating that the upper level winds are somewhat favorable in and around 10 degrees north latitude, but the bigger question regarding the intensity forecast is going to come in the medium range once it begins to approach the lesser Antilles. Obviously, we have 20 to 30 knots of wind shear over the eastern Caribbean at the moment, and it may be rather difficult for the upper level environment near the islands to really improve all that much over the next week or so. So we could begin to see a strengthening tropical cyclone in the central Atlantic, and then it could begin to suffer some weakening here once it begins to approach land. In terms of the overall steering, it looks like we will continue to see a westerly track, more so toward the Leeward Islands, and over time the ridging over the central and western Atlantic is expected to begin to weaken once again, so we could begin to see more of a turn toward the northwest and eventually to the northeast and away from the U.S. East Coast, but in the meantime we could be dealing with a very weak tropical cyclone impacting portions of the eastern Caribbean. Starting off with the 12Z run of the Canadian CMC model, we can easily see our 98L Invest disturbance located near 40 degrees west longitude, and notice that the model is steadily showing some intensification all the way into a minimal hurricane, and then by day 6, after clearing the Leeward Islands, it's located just to the north of San Juan, Puerto Rico. However, I must caution you that the CMC has the tendency to overdevelop tropical cyclones, and the upper level environment does not appear all that conducive for a significant development into a hurricane. Also, if we notice in the eastern Pacific, it's also developing that disturbance, but it's keeping it safely just off the Mexican coastline. Switching over to the 12Z run of the GFS, this is 98L Invest, and it keeps it just a little bit weaker than the CMC is indicating, and therefore it would be a little bit more prone to taking a more westerly track, especially by day 6 and day 7, and therefore by 168 hours it's located just to the south of Haiti, and that is something that we will watch for. If it remains relatively weak or fails to develop, it could wind up in the central or western Caribbean as a strong tropical wave, and then we'll just have to monitor it for any signs of development thereafter. But so far, the GFS is really not indicating that much in the way of significant development. And much like the Canadian CMC, it shows development to the south of the Gulf of Tehuantepec, and the low strengthens quite clearly into Tropical Storm Hilary, but it stays well off the Mexican coastline. And it also shows a couple tropical disturbances continuing to exit the coast of Africa, but anything that develops there over the next week or so is going to be likely to recurve due to this weakness in the low to mid-level ridging over the eastern Atlantic. And finally, if we take a quick look at the 12Z run of the ECMWF, by 24 hours we can see the makings of 98L Invest steadily intensifying into a minimal tropical system. By day 2 and day 3, it becomes just a little bit stronger, but much like the GFS, it's really not showing that much in the way of any type of significant development. And then by days 4 and 5, it's still only a 1012 millibar surface low beginning to move into the Lesser Antilles. So this could quite easily remain just a strong tropical wave or a tropical depression. And by day 5, notice that we have another large cutoff low over much of the Ohio and Tennessee valleys, and it was this type of pattern that allowed Hurricane Katia to recurve safely away from the U.S. East Coast. So if this pattern were to remain this way for the next 10 days, then at some point, if this tropical system is strong enough, and I'm talking more so a tropical storm, it's going to end up recurving over much of the western Atlantic, and by day 7 we can see that that trough is going to remain over the U.S. eastern seaboard. The only way it can really avoid that cutoff low is if it stays relatively weak as a tropical wave, and then finally by day 9 or day 10 we could see a broad area of low pressure here near the western Caribbean, and the European model is somewhat alluding to that possibility. This is the day 10 forecast, and we do have a broad area of low pressure here. So what looks to be more likely than anything is that this system could develop, but it is eventually going to weaken into a tropical wave over the eastern Caribbean, and some of the remnants are likely to recurve out to sea, while a piece of the lower half of the system continues moving off toward the west-northwest into the western Caribbean, and then we'll just have to monitor any system out there if it still looks like it has any chance to develop. And before we close out the video, this is just a quick satellite look at the developing tropical disturbance here near the Gulf of Tehuantepec. As we saw in the model guidance, every single model takes this area of low pressure more toward the west instead of going directly into the Mexican coastline. So that's fairly good news, and if we had to put out a forecast track, we would likely keep it off the coast. Now, with all that being said, we're still going to keep a close watch on it, because if it organizes a little bit closer to the coast than the models are indicating, then that could possibly raise the risk of a landfall just a little bit. But at this point, I'm not overly concerned. But this is likely to develop into Tropical Storm Hilary. We see that the disturbance is much better defined compared to what it was just yesterday afternoon. And once again, the upper level environment does appear to be favorable for steady intensification. So we should have Tropical Storm Hilary out there in the eastern Pacific sometime within the next 72 hours. And we very well could be dealing with Tropical Storm Ophelia out there in the central Atlantic. But of course, that remains to be seen. So thanks again for visiting 28storms.com. We will have another video update tomorrow afternoon.